First item on the agenda would be the approval of the minutes. I would entertain a motion to that effect.
I so move.
Second.
Then moved and seconded to approve the minutes of November 18th, 2015. Any corrections or adjustments? All those in favor of the minutes as written, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We move into the next item that we are to do each year. And as chairman, I'd like to compliment Trustee Lummis on her excellent effort in working with and putting together as a nominating committee, putting together the folks who would serve in the various capacities on the board. And with that, I would like to start with chairman first. And with that, do you have a nomination for chairman?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We nominate Ed Mosher for chairman of our board.
Second.
Does it need to be seconded, please?
No.
Thank you, Vicki.
Yes.
Aye.
Sorry. Chairman Mosher,
Trust.
can we just go ahead and approve all of these at once, or do we have to do them singly?
I think we,
I'm recalling what we did last year, which was we did them all at once. Didn't
Yeah,
we
we
put all the nominations
Oh,
on the
that would
table
be
at
nice.
once and then we
That would
approved
be
them
good.
that fashion and that was fine.
okay.
And the reason I'm asking is because you already asked at the last meeting if there were to be any other nominations.
Okay. So,
But you can do it either
Yeah.
way.
okay.
Faster.
Sounds like the preference is to do it all at once. So would you like to move the list? Would you like to read those, please?
I would just like to say that I was called dubious at college, but I have noticed that it's dubious down here, and I like to make that correction.
Oh, I see on the foundation one. It was right.
Now that you've matured, I think we ought to continue this dubious.
It's rather dubious to have you here.
I know.
Having said that, moving back to the order, if you would, please, Trustee Lummis.
The vice chairman, Bill Dubois. Treasurer, Don Erickson. Secretary, Christine Lamas. The representatives too?
No, let's just do the officers
Okay,
first.
those are the officers.
Okay. And that has been seconded by Trustee Erickson.
The second that I made applies to all four.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Are there any other nominations? Any other nominations? Hearing no other nominations, all those in favor of the election, those folks for those positions, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any- So we have a continuing slate of officers. I look forward to working with you for another year, and I appreciate your support. WACT representatives, Trustee Lummis.
We have Don Erickson and Brad Barker.
Is there a second to that nomination for those to serve as voting representatives on the board for WACT representing LCCC Board of Trustees?
I second.
Comment, please?
Yes.
Unfortunately, our chairman is very busy doing the chairman job, and he requested to pass on continuing with Wacky. But I'll have to say that we're going to miss you on that board because you have been the treasurer, you've been the president, and the chairman, I guess is the right word. And you've done a marvelous job there. And I think it's good to rotate, but I know we're going to miss you.
Appreciate those kind comments. With that, all those in favor of Trustee Erickson and Trustee Barker as being our representatives, please say aye.
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 LCCC Foundation.
We have Carol Merrill, Bill Dubois, Brenda Little.
A second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor of the slate of candidates, please say aye. Thank you and congratulations, and we appreciate your working with the foundation. I especially appreciated the report at the last meeting Trustee Little provided us with in terms of what's happening with the foundation and progress there, and look forward to it. I believe we've got a chance to spend a little time with those folks here at a gathering for the holidays, if I'm correct. And that date is what?
Week from tonight.
It's a week from tonight. Yeah.
The 9th, week from tonight.
And Mr. Chairman, I enjoy giving that report, and I think we will continue to do that after our foundation board meetings. Well, one of the three of us will.
How frequently does the foundation board meet?
Not often,
Four
quarterly.
times a year,
Mhm.
We'll look forward
unless
to
they
that.
need something special.
Yeah.
If I can add, I think one of the things I've noticed in the past year is our increased passing of information and reporting of activities that we are involved in. I think it's good that we're doing that.
Mhm.
Your report that you gave on the foundation was an excellent one.
Well, thanks. It was fun.
Thank you. Facilities and Finance Committee. And again, here I would like to comment that the folks have served us well in the past, and the group that you're recommending to us, again, Trustee Lummis, if you would provide those to us.
Carol Merrill and Don Erickson.
For Facilities and Finance Committee, is there a second?
I second.
All those in favor of the slate for Finance and Facilities Committee?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And dubious.
I agree.
Thank you. Look forward to an exciting year coming up. There's lots of things going on. Of course, most of you know that we're in the process of bringing up 2 buildings out of the ground, and it's fascinating watching those come up. And it's also quite exciting to look forward to the things that are going on campus with now that programs some of them have been, the program reviews have been done, and a lot of these things are in process. It's going to be an exciting year to follow through with this and see how the students continue to, I think, do well at our institution. So look forward to working with you, and thanks again for your support. Next item on the agenda, reports to the board, and we'll start with Student Government Association. And do we have?
So Danielle spoke to President Schaefer, and they just decided that I'll just present that in my report later.
Okay, that sounds great. We'll look forward to hearing that a little later. Staff Senate, Candy Farrell, President.
Well, I just had our meeting today. We have selected our unsung heroes for this month, but since we have not made the presentation yet, I'm going to hold off on making that announcement until later. And by popular demand, we are going to have our door decorating contest again this year. We have 2 new volunteers on the Staff Senate, and they have volunteered to take on the running of that contest. So there will be more details coming in the next couple of days. We are also having plans to do a welcome to the new employees, and we're going to begin in our January meeting by inviting all the new employees from the beginning of the fiscal year. And we'll have a welcome packet, which will include some information about Staff Senate and a little gift from the Staff Senate to our new employees. This is the beginnings of our marketing plan. We were trying to get information about Staff Senate out to the staff, hopefully gain some new members so that we can provide some more activities throughout the year like we have in the past. But we have so few members right now, we kind of decided to scale back this year. That's any questions?
Any questions? Thank you very much, Candy.
Okay.
Appreciate your report. Faculty Senate, Leah Noonan, President.
Good evening. Senate has not met since our last board meeting, so I don't really have anything to report from them. I would like to make one clarification as to last board meeting, if I could, please, especially if you would, Chairman Mosher, to Dr. Schaefer. The things that I bring to the board meeting are things I've been requested to from the Senate. So I say that in somewhat of an apology. I'm doing as I have been bid. And that's all. Thank you. Any questions?
No, and I appreciate the comments. That's what we do expect to hear, and that's information we look forward to receiving.
Thank you very much.
LCCC EA Education Association, Megan Kelly. I didn't see Megan earlier. Is someone else here to give the report for LCCEA? Okay. Sometimes I wonder what Vicki is thinking, but I know she's considering our needs, and so she puts in here the heading work items, and I know it's been there for a while, but I've always wanted to say, you really want to tell us we need to work, don't you? Thank you. First item here is DataByte, KPI measures.
And Mr. Chairman, members of the board, if I may, before I ask Ann to come to the podium and kind of walk through the specific one that she wants to talk about. As in past practice, we're bringing you the KPIs and their subsequent measures once a month. This month, what we're talking about is KPID, which focuses on workforce development. And this is really at the heart of that component of the community college's mission, which is to prepare people to either succeed in entry into the workforce or advancement within the workforce. And so we look at a number of measures underneath workforce development. You should have a handout, and towards the tail end of the handout, you'll see a page that looks like this, that shows you all of the measures and our current grades, or the grades from last year.
Okay.
If everybody has those. So here are the measures we specifically look at. As in other areas, transfer, we look at just enrollment. How many students are actually enrolled in our credit-bearing programs that are in programs designed to align with occupational entry. And similar to what we've seen overall as an institution, with enrollment decline, that has also been impacting many of these programs. And so we've been on a decline on that measure. And we have a C for that grade. And then we also look at FTE. It's another enrollment measure with that, not as significant as a decline. Again, following that track that we have, the students we have are taking more credits, thus FTE is actually not changing as fast as head count, but still on the wrong trajectory. The good news with this one, though, the total enrollment in non-credit workforce programs. So these are the programs that we have that we offer certification or coursework for non-credit through the Division of Outreach and Workforce Development. And I think predominantly because of our Act Now program and grant, we've really been doing a fantastic job in moving students through programs such as pharmacy tech, dental assisting, CNA, and those things. And those are aligned directly with jobs that are available, and students have been succeeding in completing those. So really on the right path there, and that's why we post an A grade. Then we look at, again, those credentials or those completion measures. We look at total degrees awarded. So these would be our AAS degrees and our occupational related certificates. And again, we're on the right track with total degrees awarded. Have a B, we flattened out from last year, but we're still on the right trajectory moving up. And then we look at that productivity measure, which is degrees per 100 FTE. And this gives us a sense of all the students who are pursuing a degree, are we actually graduating the appropriate percentage of them? And if you see, this current percentage is 50%. That means 50% of the students or the FTE in these programs are graduating on an annual basis. And that's what you would expect. In fact, that's actually pretty good. but it's reflective of the high number of one-year certificate programs that we have. And so in any year, we have half of those students earning their credential. So on the right path. And then, of course, our infield job placement rate, we do a very good job of getting those graduates into jobs within their field. And so you'll see the A. And then the one that, I skipped over employer satisfaction. That is grayed out on there. It's because we haven't implemented an employer satisfaction survey. It's something we're working on this year to start gathering data around that. So we look at enrollment. We look at how well students do in those programs in terms of completing. So do they get in? Yes, great. Do they get out with a credential? Yes, great. Is that credential relevant? Are they getting jobs? Hopefully, yes, great. And then we'll also look at, and when you get that job, are your employers happy with you? Did we prepare you well? And that's why we look at employer satisfaction. And so that will be coming in future years. And then the last one is licensure and certification pass rate. And I'll let Ann describe that one and give you the current status of where we're at. So Ann, please.
Mr. Chair, before we move on to a greater examination, what do you do? How do you go about the gradients between an A, B, C? Okay, so we have for a number of students enrolled a C.
Okay.
Then enrollment non-credit, we have an A. Where do you separate the A, the B, the C, and so on?
I'll walk you through this, and Ann will correct me if I get off in my mathematics. We covered this when we went over the overview of the process. So we use a grading scale, and what we do is we look at different inputs to determine things that we could compare to. So for example, we have 5 years worth of data. So let's look at the first one, the enrollment headcount in the programs. We have 5 years worth of data, and you can see just to the right of the grading process, you have 5 years prior, 4 years prior, and then the current results. So we look at within that 5 years, we look at the highest enrollment, the minimum or the maximum, the lowest enrollment, the minimum, and then we look at the average, and that provides 3 data inputs right there. Then we look at, if you flip on the other side of that page as well, we look at a benchmark. So where we try to benchmark against an external group, the Wyoming community colleges, the members of that participate in the National Community College Benchmarking Program. So we look at a benchmark, some type of external benchmark to compare us to. So that's the fourth input. And then we have an improvement goal. And using the model that the committee working with Ann came up with, we try to set, well, what would we want to see as an improvement goal on this measure? And then we get 5 inputs. So from those inputs, we calculate an average and we calculate a standard deviation. So if you're with me thus far, the average sits at the low end of our B grade, correct?
Yes.
At B grade. And then the way we create a grading scale, and you can see on the far right, if you look at A min, B min, C min, D min, that's our grading scale. So our average should be the B minimum, which is 1,224. And then we use standard deviations to create the grading range. So one standard deviation above that is the minimum for an A. And then of course, anything above that is an A. One standard deviation below that is the minimum for a C. 2 standard deviations below that is the minimum for a D. And it gives us a grading scale based on all those inputs. Now, if you're a true mathematician, some people would argue that 5 inputs to create a standard deviation, there's some limits to that. We recognize it. So as we get to the point where we have 10 years of data, it might get better. But right now, it provides us a pretty strong framework to look at based on those 5 points. And it also keeps from one point really skewing a grading scale. I hope I explained that well.
Mr. Chair, yes, Dr. Joe, you surprised me with your response, because I was going to say, I wonder how subjective this is. It's pretty darn quantitative.
Yeah, well, and as a segue to Ann, she's been recognized nationally, and we have for this model, and has presented on the model for how this works, and has garnered the interest and requests from other people from much larger institutions than us. So the model it's not perfect, and we have some things to work out, but it's pretty impressive in terms of trying to get a grade to give us an indication of how well we're doing on a unit or on a specific measure. So, yeah.
Thank you, Dr.
You got an A. The high deviation.
Yes.
did very
And
well.
we know that you're going to get an A, so.
I hope so.
All right.
Thank you for letting me sit. Wanted to just dig into, as we've been doing the past few months, dig into one of the measures. I picked this one because we've got, this is actually one where we've had data for a long time on it. And in some ways, it's going to show some of the limitations of our system just because of the small quantity that we have. We look at everything that we have licensure rates for, which is currently just our health programs are the ones with outside accreditations. Those programs get reports back from the licensing people. Other programs, students can go and have certification, but we don't have a good mechanism for getting that back yet. So that's one way we want to improve this, is to see if we can get more information into it. We don't have a benchmark for this one because of the way we do it. We take every individual test and we kind of roll them up and aggregate it and get an average for that. So each individual one has a comparison with a national or a regional, depending on which one it is, but there's no benchmark for the roll-up one that we have. So this one really just has the 4 data points that is going on. And there's also a little bit of a time lag on this one. It's done in August with the KPI system, and the spring graduates may not have all sat for their licensure examination yet. So there's a little bit of a time lag on this one. If we go to the next page, the graph, you see our last 5 years on this one and the current results with a little bit bigger view from what Vicki and Dr. Schaefer provided at the end of the document here. You see that we took, on the graph, it looks like quite a bit of a downturn from not quite 96% to not quite 90% on there. That's due in large part because of a drop in the nursing licensure. If you go to the next page, you can see the data that's behind this one. Oh, there. Backing up, because we had been on an upward trend and we took a drop. That's kind of why we ended up with a C for this measure this time around. The next page, I got ahead of myself. So this is the data that's behind that. So you can see in here we've got actually 2 different nursing licensures on there. The RN is the degree graduates on the very first one. The NCLEX, PN, those are our certificate graduates. And you can tell just by looking at it, they make up well over half of the people sitting for licensure exams. So what happens in nursing, for a large part, sways this. And they did drop it in this most recent one compared to previously. I spoke with Jennifer Anderson, our nursing program director, about this and some strategies they're implying. And she indicated that was a nationwide trend. Everybody, nursing licensure rates went down in that 13-14 year on there, but we were above the national average. So from the nursing program's point of view, from accreditation, they're where they want to be. The other one I wanted to point out on this was the very small one for surgical technology program. This one was actually put on hold right after this graduation year. That was a very small class. So when you look at just that one, small classes mean small denominators, mean volatile rates. So that one can go from 71% to 100% to 60% on there. So there's been a lot done in the surgical technology program while it was put on hold to revise the curriculum and get more students. And so to kind of correct that trend, that bounciness of it. If we have more students, that's going to even out a little bit. So, questions so far?
Trustee.
How many students do they take? Do they just take the 7 surgical?
They could take up to 12.
up to 12, but they don't get that many
They
applicants.
have, they have currently 9 are enrolled in the program.
Okay, because at one point I thought that the job market wasn't supportive of them here.
What happened with surgical technology, Trustee Merrill, board, is when we originally started this program, we did a needs assessment, and yes, gung ho. And so we went ahead with it. We actually the program was brought down, I believe it was from CWC. Searching my memory, so it was one from one of the other community colleges in the state. They were closing theirs because there wasn't enough people there. So we thought we had the need for here, but then this is the one of our health occupations programs, one of these programs, even though it's accredited, you can go work as a surgical technologist without being certified.
Oh.
And so, and at the time we brought the program down, the certification was going to be a requirement, and that fell through. So I think that's one of the reasons we've always struggled to get the classes up there.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Merrill, if I may, certainly there was an impression, and I think the previous program director felt that it was the lack of, not necessarily jobs, but the lack of the need for the certification that was driving program enrollment. I can tell you though, with our new program director who hit the ground and had a few months, Terry, basically to get the program going, to have what we have in it now is a reflection that there is both interest from students, but we've also heard from the president of the board of I think it's the High Plains Surgery Center and other places that there's a need locally. The bigger issue though is there isn't a program in the state of Wyoming. And there is enough of a need across the state that we need to have a program. What we're working on now is looking at, how do we get this program working the way it's working, but then how do we modify the program or add the options so that we can more effectively extend the program into the rural communities across the state or partner with other community colleges. So I believe there's currently a need, and there will continue to be a need for certified scrub techs. We just have to rethink some of the way we deliver the program, and just the changes we've done thus far is already starting to move us in the right direction, and we see that in the student numbers.
Great.
Mr. Chair, just one follow-up on that. Wasn't one of the problems the scheduling of the actual coursework to get it so that the students would be able to attend? Am I getting that right, Terry?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, I'd have to ask Terry if she's got any additional thoughts.
Sure. I believe you're correct, Trustee Erickson. That was addressed with our new program director and the redevelopment of that program. And so it's now a hybrid program, which creates the flexibility that the students need, because many of them are working full-time. And they're getting that on-the-job training, which across the nation is now going to require certification in different states. And so we're hearing from folks across the nation that are calling us and saying, how can we get your training and have that in an online fashion? So we're actually branching out with how we're delivering the program, and it's so far very successful.
Good to hear.
Thank you.
And I just had one more page to go through with you, and we've actually hit on the first point on the what are we doing about it page, which had to do with the surgical technology program. In a lot of ways, this is a monitoring measure, and although we don't want to be average on a C, because most of these rates are really high already, out of 100%, a lot of the programs, radiography has nowhere to go. They cannot improve on this. So a lot of the programs really are not working so much to keep making this one better, because they can't, but use it for monitoring. They do get reports back by section of the exam. Dental hygiene and nursing specifically were telling me how they use this, so they can see where their students aren't doing well and then use the curriculum that goes with it and improve it that way. And there's also an institutional focus on improving student success in the courses. And so by improving success in the courses all the way along, along, there's going to be an improvement in the licensure rates, we presume, on there. So it's not so much that we're specifically targeting this one for improvement as we have the other ones that I presented for you. Which I guess was another reason why I wanted to show you one as well. It's a C. We can hope to get to a B. It's going to be really, really hard for us to get to an A. And this is going to be a measure for in a couple of years where we're probably going to have to introduce a fourth kind of. We're going to have to change our measuring instead of it's pretty much a linear assumption right now. This is one that's going to have to do, it's called logarithmic, but we're going to have to work out a way. So instead of trying to improve linearly, we're going to have to let it bend because there's a definite ceiling. We can't get higher on this. With that, I'm open for any other questions, Mr.
Trustee
Chair.
Merrill.
Chair Mosier. I don't think that this question was asked before, but if these nursing students take the test as they graduate, this is the measure of that. Because my assumption is that they will take the test again
Yes.
for a second chance to pass, but we don't note that.
These are only their first attempt. And while the program directors do find out who passed on this on the second attempt or even a third attempt, if it takes that much, most of the reporting where this is in our KPIs, it's also done as some state reporting, and that's specifically on the first attempt.
Okay.
Any other questions, Mr. Chairman?
Just you mentioned non-medical, and I was wondering how we might look at things out of, for example, the automotive area where they take the ASCE, I believe it is.
Excuse me. My plan is for next semester to really recruit those faculty and see if they can reach out. They get some anecdotally from their students, but we don't get them all, and we need a more systematic way of collecting that. But I'm hoping to, with the faculty and their advisory committees, come up with another way of getting that data more consistently.
And Mr. Chairman, just to answer your question, there are numerous other industry certifications and ones that students are sitting for. So it's not just the ASE, but well, in the IT area, there's the CCNA, the Cisco certifications. We run into two issues. One issue is there's no way actually to get reported information back at the student record level, let alone aggregate information. And we see a lot of that with our is it Thompson that does the testing now for like CCNA and those things. And I believe that's the same with ASE. Essentially, the results are confidential to the student and to the organization. And so, as Ann, I think, pointed out in here, that doesn't mean that we can't find a way to start to incorporate that. And I think there's some ways that faculty can work with certifying agencies to receive either aggregate data or even individualized data that we could perhaps demonstrate as a requirement for the completion of, say, a capstone course. So I think there's some options, but they're not as clean as the healthcare ones where we get the reporting back by the student and can actually report on that for cohorts.
Thank you. Any other questions? Appreciate your report, Ann.
Thank you.
As usual, you dazzled us with the numbers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
I should say with the explanation of the numbers. Okay, and is Kim?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as Kim works his way to the podium. Dr. Bender, I apologize, works his way to the podium. Just a brief overview. At your last meeting, you heard during your learning agenda during dinner about the comprehensive program review structure. And what you'll have tonight is the first report to the board on the program review outcomes from the first time we've put programs through this new structure. So with that, Kim, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, trustees, President Schaefer, and guests. I'm here to present the annual report for program review. It's the first report using LCCC's new procedure 10.2. I'll begin on page 4, where the full report begins. I'd like to, first of all, start by explaining my main theme for this presentation is to explain why the sections exist in the report. So you may be or may have wondered what an annual program review report should look like, or what sections should make up such a report. And so rather than describing, I'll describe in some ways the what about the report, but I thought it would be most constructive if I explained a little bit about why some of these sections appear in the report. They might appear again in subsequent reports if they're valued. And I would appreciate some feedback at any time on if you think there should be sections that should show up in an annual report like this. That would be helpful. To begin with, on page 4 of the main body, we'll talk, at least I'll explain a little bit about the introduction. This first report I felt had to have a more comprehensive treatment, as it is the first report. And it'll be a document of evidence, of course, too, for our AQUIP pathways and HLC personnel when they come to visit us 2019, 2020, and also we'll probably present this as evidence along with other program review reports in our systems portfolio in 2018. So this report does include a statement about alignment with respect to our process and the board objectives for program review. Since we covered that ground, I just put the description of alignment in Appendix A. And you are familiar with that already because I presented earlier on that part of it. The baseline measures for performance are included in this report as well, and we'll talk more about those when we get to the last page of the report. But baseline measures are important because for the next 2, 3, 4 years, we'll be comparing ourselves back to these measures on these levels of performance. The other thing we want to do with this report is to show or demonstrate what are the patterns of program review output for our 10 programs in this cycle. We have also included in this report program-specific executive summaries that appear in the appendix, Part B. We had 10 programs undergo program review, so there are 10 executive summaries. And I will go through an example of an executive summary near the conclusion of my presentation, so you have a good idea of what one of those executive summaries looks like. With respect to timing, this report is somewhat delayed, as you know. I'll just review again the timeline for program review. From September through January, programs develop their self-studies for program review. In February, the Academic Standards Program Review Subcommittee reviews those self-studies and writes feedback comments into the online self-study itself. Early March, the program leaders respond to those review feedback comments. And then the two groups meet face-to-face in late March, early April to further discuss the program review. The program review subcommittee in April will go in and look at the responses that the program writes to the peer review comments and consider readjustment of scores in the program review rubric that's used as part of the process. And then in late April, May, academic standards will determine which programs are to complete follow-up reports if scores indicate they have sections that are underdeveloped. Later on in September is when the annual report for program review should ideally be presented to the board. So that gives you a rough timeline of how the process unfolds. There is a section near the beginning on AQUIP. We're including that so that we can reinforce one of the purposes of program review, which is to develop and strengthen the institution's maturity and continuous improvement. Our feedback from AQUIP multiple times, but especially in the systems appraisal feedback report, says the institution needs to strengthen performance in the area of self-evaluation, producing data on performance processes, and also improve its identification of improvements based on data that programs develop. So some of the ways that we're building or strengthening those two areas, that is self-evaluation and data-driven improvements, is obviously with this program review in a very intentional way. Those categories come up multiple times in the template. And coupled with that, we also are beginning to offer workshops, in-service training, and developing resources online to help programs get better at developing data, identifying what data they want to use, where they can attain the data, how they can organize it in tabular forms and do some analysis and find strengths and weaknesses in their programming. So it's not just program review, but we have other efforts that are integrated with program review that are helping to strengthen those two areas so that we can achieve a greater level of maturity and continuous improvement. We have a little bit of evidence of verification that our process is noteworthy. The institution submitted the non-academic program review process to HLC as an action project. And the AQUIP process provides reviews of those action projects. And in that review of non-academic program review, which basically is very similar to academic program review, the reviewers suggested that we develop a proposal to HLC and present this process to a wider audience. So I think they are looking favorably on how we're designing our program review process. Now we say we're engaging faculty, but are we proving that? And can we prove that? And that's why the section of faculty and staff participation appears in the annual report. This kind of participation and discussion about it should appear in other reports because it really indicates how much our faculty are interacting with each other and how hard they're working to think about tough questions on quality and how to solve problems with respect to achieving quality. So as you notice on page 6, tables 3 and 4, you'll get an idea of some of the participants in program review. There are about 14 program review leaders. Those leaders develop self-studies. We also have 30 faculty and staff participating in the review portion of the process. There's 44 faculty altogether. They are visiting back and forth online, asking questions, talking back and forth about improving continuously their programming. As you can see in the tables displayed there, especially the top table, you can see that peer reviewers developed 635 peer review feedback comments to programs, and programs responded with 230 responses. Now, those numbers represent a huge amount of effort and interaction between faculty on these questions of continuous improvement. So you have to, I think it's important to realize that each of our sections in the template contain a description of assumed practices. These assumed practices describe what the institution expects programs to do in their normal operations. So are those assumed practices being shared among faculty? I think we can say yes with this section on faculty and staff participation. And also through all the dialogues that they enter into, we can be pretty well assured that they're picking up some of the knowledge of the assumed practices and so forth. I think that's part of developing organizational learning, and also it's strengthening institutionally our culture of continuous improvement. With respect to comparative data, starting on page 7, we do offer some course details in a comparative framework. I'm just only going to mention that there's an appreciation one gains about the context of performance. For example, if you look at the table on course success and you're moving down that right column, you notice history has a lower score than maybe some of the other areas. But if you move over to page 9 under the KPI table, you notice to the left on the higher scores, the higher quintile performances on KPIs, 4 and 5, what program shows up? History shows up in a couple of areas. So it's not so simple that we can look at one number and think that that one number defines a program. We have to look at a multiple indicators. The impact of the KPIs, I think, was demonstrated in this cycle, and it's only our first cycle. But 4 or 5 programs, I'll mention a few: art, computer science, music, and paralegal, all developed action plan goals as a response to low KPI numbers, low KPI indicating scores, mostly around enrollment, but in other places too, completion rates. So if you, as a board, are wondering, how are we making the best use of our KPIs and that system? Are we really continuously improving programs based on KPIs? Where's the evidence that we're improving programs based on KPIs? If programs are developing action plan goals that are in effect for the next 5 years and they are tied to KPIs or response to KPIs, I would say that that's evidence that programs are improving based on data from the KPIs. So I think that's significant and should develop some confidence that the process is working as we hoped it would. Now again, just as a reminder, programs do talk about KPIs when they come up. And if they don't, the reviewers will ask them to talk about the KPIs. And if we still don't get a response from the programs, then academic standards will ask them, because it'll likely get scored low, and then academic standards will ask for a follow-up report for that program to develop planning and approaches to strengthen its performance in that indicator area.
So, excuse me, just a second. Dr. Bender, if I look at on page 9 then, based on what you're saying, if I look at the learning environment paralegal and they received a 1, I would assume that somewhere then I'm going to see a plan which is going to speak to some changes on the learning environment. Is that what I'm understanding you to be talking about?
That would be ideal. And they did respond to KPIs, but I think it was in the enrollment area. So they're working on an action plan in that area too. Some of these are related. Sometimes if you increase enrollment, it strengthens performance in another area.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Lastly, on that table on page 9, as you'll notice, the programs tend to cluster a bit on the lower end of the scale on program performance for efficiency and effectiveness, efficiency KPIs. This is consistent also with the scoring of reviewers when they read through the self-studies. As you'll notice later when we get to the last page for the scoring rubric, you'll notice programs perform somewhat lower in the efficiency and effectiveness area as well. The next couple of categories are under a single area of template categories. And I won't take a lot of time in each one of these, but what this report tries to do with respect to knowledge distribution, organizational effectiveness, and planning is to point out what the patterns, the output patterns are among these 10 programs. So briefly, for knowledge distribution, programs did a little better on that section than the other two. I think one of the reasons for that was all of the work that Academic Standards did with programs during the 14-15 year with respect to the MCORS process and developing degree plans. So when it came time for programs to upload or provide evidence on curriculum and the design and the structure, what would they do? They would upload a degree plan. If we asked them about, are you aligning curriculum, are you aligning course competencies to program level competencies, they would talk about MCORS because MCORS request that alignment. We had a lot of emphasis on articulation, and they had no trouble talking about that part of their activity either. So just noting that congruence or parallel work that faculty were doing, I think resulted in a better performance in the knowledge distribution area and the curriculum area. They did have some problems was the description of how their curriculum systematically builds rigor and complexity in student learning over the life of a student's career in a program. We will develop in these weak areas some best practices over time, and the review comments help the programs pay or at least understand that they need to keep working on that section. Also in their assessment planning, the annual assessment planning, that peer review process also asks them to speak in more clear terms about how they intentionally develop rigor and complexity in student learning over time. With respect to organizational effectiveness, again, all of these sections are on page 10. There are again some patterns recognized. Programs offered little time trend data for efficiency over time. Little analysis of purchasing processes, and I provide two examples from automotive and welding, areas that do a considerable amount of purchasing, but they did not describe their processes very well or analyze their processes, if they're effective or not for purchasing, low cost and so forth. Student fees were not analyzed by programs to see if they are at appropriate levels or if they're effective. There was surprisingly little surveying on resources. And medical sonography was the only program that offered a survey on resources, on personnel, physical resources, clinical experiences, and so forth. So that is also shown as a best practice to get more visibility to that activity so that programs will run into it more often. In both the organizational effectiveness and planning performance, I haven't been here that long, but the report is suggesting that programs are not very effective in these two areas of organizational effectiveness and planning because of a lack of historical experience in those areas. And I'll get to that a little bit more in detail when we talk about the planning performance. Now, with respect to planning, if we look at the board objectives, the board has certain expectations for planning. They expect programs to develop plans and planning out of program review in order to continuously improve. Continuous improvement is hard to develop without plans. Certainly data is hard to develop without planning. We plan to respond to that, I think, through the academic standards process and the follow-up reporting. When we ask programs to develop follow-up reports, and there are several sections that they have to develop rationales or explanations of how they're going to improve and strengthen sections, we're going to funnel that into action planning. We're going to be recommending that they develop action plans and continuous improvement planning in order to mitigate weaknesses and strengthen performance in areas that are underdeveloped. So that should help boost up, for at least this cycle, which didn't, I don't think, do a very good job at producing enough planning resources. Some programs only develop one action plan goal. There are 21 action plan goals altogether that were developed. Some did better, developing 4 or 5, and others just 1. So, but mostly the average is 2, and I don't think it's up to the expectations of the board. There are some patterns that came up in planning. I think if you go to page 11, I will point some of those out, and I'm not doing that very much in this report, going specifically to a page. The reason I'm placing a little bit more emphasis on this is because overall, our program review process has discovered, I think, this to be one of the central weaknesses of our programs and their inability to plan effectively. Now, think about in your own experience, if you had to develop a research plan, then it would make sense after you've developed what areas you want to research and you had a plan set up, you would construct some data expectations in that plan to show how well you're progressing through your research. But if you never sat down to develop a plan, why would you gather any data? And why would you think about identifying data indicators? So we have a weakness, as we've noted, that institutionally we're a little bit weak on developing data and thinking about self-evaluation or evaluation of our processes. And I believe it's because we don't do a very good job, or at least in the past, structurally, to develop a planning infrastructure where programs on the program level, not talking about the institution level, program level where programs begin systematically to develop planning to continuously improve, and have peer reviewers look at that planning, scrutinize it, and make recommendations to improve the planning itself. In program reviews, previous program reviews, I found very little structural or systematic kinds of approaches to planning or action planning. I think we've gone a long way to fixing that with respect to our annual assessment planning. In Aquila now, 45 or plus programs have annual assessment plans. We also have our action plan goals now, which we want to strengthen because we want to develop more action plan goals for this cycle. But without the plans, you don't see faculty focusing on how they're going to develop the data to measure the progress of that planning. So first, I think we need to really work with programs and get them more comfortable with planning on a regular basis. As I suggest, for example, on page 10, you'll see reading through some of the observations and patterns that emerged on their planning performance. Few references, about the 4th line down, few references appeared in the self-studies about how well action plans were shared with deans, chairs, and advisory board. Albeit more mention was made of advisory boards. In the improvement section on planning, few programs recognized their own new planning efforts, such as their multiple goals appearing in assessment planning. Nor did programs discuss their new assessment planning and action goals in the final sections on future capacity to succeed. Reviewers frequently reminded programs to mention their new planning efforts in these self-studies, and this occasionally resulted in program acknowledgement when developing their responses, but not uniformly, though. This failure to recognize their own recent experience in planning indicates to me that this activity remains an abstract exercise. So in other words, when they were asked to mention the improvements they have made in planning, they didn't mention their own improvements they had made in planning, which was remarkable, I thought. So we had to remind them that, yes, indeed, you did have 4 plans for outcome performance and learning competencies in your annual assessment planning. And you just developed a self-study that has, in some cases 1, but in some cases 4 action plan goals. That is planning. And those plans had structure to them because they had an evaluation section that asked them to show how they were going to develop their data. And so this kind of was an eye opener for me. We all probably take for granted that these programs know how to do planning well, but I don't think they've really had the infrastructure until now to really begin developing plans and having that capacity available for them. And this, I think, will help them think more constructively about data and why they should begin developing data and thinking about how to use it more effectively in their continuous improvement efforts. The last part of that section, the capacity for future success, this was surprising to me that programs performed better in that section. And I explained there, I think faculty were fairly resourceful and resilient in their descriptions of that area. I think maybe perhaps that even may have interested programs to kind of think about their programming and the resiliency in that way. The only part that was a little weaker in that section on capacity for future success was change management and their ability to manage change because they're doing such a poor job of planning. Discovery, strengths, opportunities, and concerns. Those patterns will take longer to emerge. We didn't have a lot of consistency or clustering around certain kinds of strengths or concerns that were pervasive across all programs, really. But after 3, maybe 2 to 3 more years, we may see more development there. With respect to alignment of action plan goals to the LCCC strategic planning, again, similar patterns will emerge later after 2 or 3 years. Right now, as you go through that alignment, probably doesn't seem all that significant to you. There were 21 action plan goals. They appear in Appendix C, all of those action plan goals. But in this section, I just mentioned the action plan goals that are related to the LCCC strategic planning. 8 of 10 of those goals relate to goal number 1 of the strategic plan, the completion agenda for the 21st century. So most of the activities appearing in that area. So why should we care about planning and why should we care about alignment? I believe that when we begin to align program level action goals to our institutional strategies, it has a multiplier effect. So this report suggests that the more programs that begin to do planning and the more planning that is aligned with strategic planning, the more human effort is intentionally designed towards achieving those LCCC strategies. So it's a kind of layering that's important, I think, and that's what we try to do in program review. And so every year we should be expecting a report on that alignment. The other thing we should be expecting is how well is this institution doing at attaining its goals? So we couldn't do a very good job with that previously because the previous program reviews didn't consistently have an action plan goals section. There are cases where action plan goals show up in not that naming, but some goals did show up. But the point being is we want to know as an institution how well we do attain our goals. That is also an HLC expectation and part of their criteria when that they have in their expectations for institutional performance. That's why that section is kind of important to keep an eye on, I think. This is also a resource. The action planning is a resource for our new position for institutional project coordinator. As many times, these action plan goals will need assistance, and they'll have to develop projects in order to attain the goals that they want to achieve. So there is kind of an interrelationship there. So it's not like, the institution's not just expecting programs to plan and then leave them alone. If they want to develop a project and have that project accelerate their attainment of a goal, they have resources now with this institutional coordinator. And we're developing a more significant and comprehensive process for project management soon. There are some concerns that the report points out with respect to our program review process, so it's not perfect. And some of those had to do with clarification on some of the sections, which drew some duplication. For example, we do have 3 repetition kinds of cycles. We ask for them to talk about their data and the results and improvements that are data driven. We asked for them to talk about that 3 times, once under knowledge distribution, once under organizational effectiveness, and once under planning. So some programs just copied over what they had in knowledge distribution for some of those data and replicated that in other areas. I think part of that is because they didn't have a lot of data to provide on organizational effectiveness or their performance on planning. So we, in improvements, which follows, we did clarify and make clarifications in the next cycle for program review to strengthen that distinction, so programs don't have that same problem. We also had 2 programs mention that they felt that faculty did not have the needed expertise to develop data. So we we are developing workshops and have held workshops during in-service in the fall on how to develop data at the program level. We also participated in a day-long faculty connections day. It's an advising day in November to work just on developing data. We also are putting up more resources. Anne Murray developed a table of resources for data, and we presented that at that full faculty day at Faculty Connections as well. So faculty actually have a 1-page table that explains several data resources, live links where they can go to find that data. And so I think that's a resource that did not exist before for the campus, for the faculty. We saw several faculty actually participating during that training online, looking at data, for example, on their institutional competencies that are reflected in the scoring rubrics that they complete. Other resources, of course, are the annual peer review on assessment planning, which tells them how to improve their planning. Next spring, we're going to do another peer review as part of our annual review of assessment planning, and then we'll have a scrutinizing and critiquing of plans, presentation of data. So last spring, we critiqued planning. This spring, we will critique the data presentations and try to strengthen that. Also, there's a best practices locator that's now available on Eagle's Eye to faculty. I present that in this report in your appendix. on, I believe it's the last appendix, Appendix D. It's a locator, so faculty can go in and click on a section of the template and see best practices in that area. Some of the improvements that are made to program review process. We made some changes in the self-study template to reduce duplication of information, added clarity to the assumed practices, made some changes to the timeline that we use to recognize more formally the second review that reviewers do in order to readjust scoring. With respect to the program review rubric, we added more data. In addition to course details and KPI data, we added sense data and SESI data. That's on student engagement. It's the institution's, those are two tools the institution use to measure student engagement on campus. We added an emphasis on curriculum mapping as part of the design of programs curriculum. We not only made a suggestion, but we uploaded a blank curriculum map that programs can use easily to complete their own design of the mapping itself. And it's also included as a best practice that came out of the paralegal program. With respect to quality of the reviewer feedback, just as a kind of FYI for the board, we do make some attempt at establishing inter-rater reliability of the reviewers in early spring before they begin their reviews. And as one of the improvements for the process, we want to strengthen that this coming February when we do our orientation for reviewers. We've had pretty good consistency in scoring. So I thought we did pretty well for our first year, but we should continue for the first few years, probably always, to emphasize that at the beginning of each review cycle for orientation of reviewers. I won't talk too much more about the review, except we had to work twice. The reviewers had to review in February, March of the spring, and then again this fall for a couple of months. But that should not be the case next year. We did have to parallel with the course revision curriculum redesign, which really took a lot of faculty resources. So it was difficult to maintain our normal timeline for 14-15. The next step basically is for academic standards to complete that, whether they're going to, they'll notify programs if they're accepting their self-study or if they're accepting it contingent based on some follow-up reports. And they'll tell programs what areas and sections that are underdeveloped that they want improvement on. That's where we'll enter, that's where we'll strengthen action planning. That's the step where we'll strengthen some action planning. Basically, the conclusion confirms that planning is a place to work harder. And that I think that's a first step into strengthening our data development. The last page is our kind of scorecard of program review output. This represents a huge number of person hours. It's a one-page aggregation of all the rubric scoring that was done by reviewers. Remember, our program review subcommittee of academic standards reviewed programs the first time to get an initial scoring, and then a second time for readjusting scores. So I have to give a special thank you to Jennifer Thompson. Jennifer works a lot with the scoring rubrics. She collects all the scoring rubrics from reviewers, compiles and aggregates them, And remember, this is 2 reviews, and in some cases there were almost, there were in spring 30 people reviewing multiple programs. So that means Jennifer's getting 30 rubrics back and having to aggregate all those scores. And in the fall, we did that again a second time in most cases for readjustment of scoring. So there's a huge amount of work that the program review subcommittee does. And I think you can always check later with Terry Harper. She has firsthand experience at how much work reviewers do as she does the review. And it takes about 3 to 4 hours to review a program review. And so we had 10 of those scored by many, many folks twice. So just want to make sure that you get a full appreciation for the amount of work that goes into this nice one-page table that's easy to look at perhaps, but it's a lot of effort going on behind that summary of scoring that you're looking at. Mostly, I guess, I hope it becomes apparent pretty immediately that which programs are performing better than others, or in what areas our institution is having patterns of weakness at. The green shaded cells are all those cells that are above 3, and that means that section for that program is meeting our assumed practices. The scores that are clear are scores that are under 3. Those are underdeveloped sections as scored by the reviewers. Now remember, this is a score card representing 1/5 of our programs roughly. This becomes more and more valued, I think, each year we do a program review, as we'll have more and more programs and more experience to fold into this scorecard area. Just a few brief conclusions one can draw is that we are doing a little better in knowledge distribution than we are in in self-evaluation and improvements. Towards the bottom, you'll notice in the color coding, we have self-study averages in orange, but underneath that, we have self-evaluation average, all 3 sections. That means if you go down the left column and take B under knowledge distribution, C under organizational effectiveness, and B under program planning, that is all self-evaluation. All 3 of those scores are added up, aggregated, and you get a score for art on self-evaluation. We don't have a lot of room in this table to make a lot of description, but that's what that 3 sections means. We do the same thing for improvement. And we are doing this because we want to know how well we're doing at self-evaluation and identifying improvements based on data, because that's where we're trying to get stronger on. That's where we're trying to improve our performance in the maturity of our performance in the AQUIP rubric on continuous improvement. So over time, this is a baseline measure. We hope to have a trend line going upward in these 2 areas of self-evaluation and improvements tied to data over time. It should be a valuable piece of evidence for ourselves to show that our processes are working like they're intended, and also to our external accreditation folks who come to review us. Lastly, the executive summaries themselves is the next document you have in your packet. It should be on the front, there should be a blue colored section with program overview information, program identification of the program reviewers and so forth. That lacks section academic standards, program review subcommittee reviewers. That lists the review folks that took the time to evaluate this program in medical sonography, diagnostic medical sonography. I'm not going to spend time looking through or saying too much about these sections. I did want to give you an example, though, so that the board would have a good understanding what's in the appendix, and that there are 10 of these in the appendix. This is just one. They're all formatted the same way, so the same sections will appear, but with the context specific to a program. So we thought for the executive summary, it was important to talk, or at least to demonstrate what the relationship the program has to mission, and also to state its values. A little brief summary about the program, maybe the history of the program, how it functions, where it's located, how many faculty it has, and so forth. Program objectives, of course, that's an obvious one. We want to make sure we identify what each program's objectives are. Under success past program action goals, we don't have a lot always here that is in a previous program review, but sonography did have a couple of items that they could respond to. On page 55 is the specific KPI indicator sheet for this program. So it brings down to a very detailed level if you are interested, or programs are interested to see exactly what are the individual scores within an average area KPI indicator under participation or efficiency, for example. The program achievements, each program has a nice listing of achievements over time. ART has a good listing, others as well. This program, and rightfully so, is wants to highlight its student success rates in exam performance. The section on strengths, concerns, opportunities, and recommendations. I guess if I was going to make a recommendation to board members on what areas of the executive summary to focus on, you might take a little time looking at this section, because these sections are much more descriptive than what we have in the overall report. And it will list challenges and concerns in a very detailed way. You might learn a little bit more about some of the strengths of our programs, but also some of the concerns and challenges they face. This would be a section to pick up a lot of information in that area. High impact dialogues, part H. There are only 2 of these that are going to appear in executive summaries. This one for sonography, if you notice, the first thing that appears in the dialogue, and I wanted to give you an example of a dialogue. This is how kind of a conversation that faculty had back and forth. The program narrative is what the program is saying about itself in the self-study. Then you'll see a section on internal review comments, and the reviewers have their names stated when they when they put a comment in for reviewing on page 58 at the top. Near the top of 58, you'll start seeing some names like Griego, D. Rogers, and my name, and other names, S. Robbins, and so forth, where comments appear. Below that are program responses that sonography is entering. They might use a name like M. Kelly Duncan to note what they're responding to. They're responding to the comment of Kelly and Duncan. And some of the changes they're making or data that they're going to add to the self-study in response to the feedback comments. I'll add that paralegal is the other executive summary that has a dialogue like this. I point that out because the reviewers were asking for a curriculum map. And we, none of the 10 programs provided us with a curriculum map. And the reviewers asked for one from paralegal, and paralegal gave us one. And so I think that's a nice point of impact. And why it's even stronger is we then included that curriculum map in our best practices locator. They mentioned their action plan goals, and following that, you get another rubric at the end. It's a very, very detailed scoring rubric. And it's not aggregated, obviously. This is the disaggregated rubric for just sonography. It has 2 sets of scores, 2 columns over to the right. The first column represents the first round of scoring in March for for some programs. The first round of scoring, and then when program reviewers went back in to reread the responses, so I have to read for the first time program responses and to reread their narratives. In that second time, or that second kind of review, they make their scores evident in the AS adjusted column over on the far right. Those are the very final scores, and that's what we use in our final analysis. Also, you noticed maybe there are some, you don't notice the red marks because I chose sonography, and sonography didn't have any areas under 3. So, but if we were looking at art, for example, they would not all be green. Then the underperforming sections are marked in red, so they're easy to identify. The blacked out sections you see in the rubric are blacked out so that the reviewers don't have to score them a second time because they are already above 3. A section that's above 3 does not have to be scored again. So it's blacked out so there's no confusion and extra work that reviewers have to do. Lastly, on the bottom of these rubrics is the AQUIP maturity scoring, and we're using that again as a baseline to kind of indicate, as an indicator of our where we feel we're scoring on the maturity rubric, that AQUIP piece for continuous improvement. And that concludes my presentation. Any questions?
Trustee Erickson.
Mr. Chair, Dr. Bender, thank you very much for this rather thorough review of the components and the process of this program review. I've got a number of questions that I think I'll, in the interest of time, ask Dr. Bender at another time. But I do have a couple of comments. I try to get my arms around this. It's really overwhelming for those of us that are not anywhere near involved in the process. This afternoon, when we had the opportunity to look at our agenda for today, and I saw the report there, and I had a couple hours to go through all 10 of these program reviews, and it really helped to take the time to go through it because I understand it a little bit better. Last meeting when you met with us, I was out in left field. I don't have a clue what you were talking about then. I have a much better understanding now. I kind of look at this first cycle, as you call it, as a pretest because you haven't done it before. And you're going to have opportunities to look for ways to improve the process, to help the training for the people who are impacted by each program. I'm sure that the reasons that you have very few responses in 3 of the areas, the participation, that seems to be an area that everybody can get a hold of, but the others, as far as the organization, the effectiveness, efficiency, and so forth, is going to take, I think, some study and work by the individuals who are involved doing it. You indicated that you would like to have our comments as to what we would like to see in these reports. At this point, one of the things I would like to see in next year's report is a follow-up on this report. Kind of like the way the audit, our fiscal audit, is put together, and we have management notes, and if there's some areas there that are identified that need to be worked on, that there is going to be a follow-up as to what has been done. So you want me to make, are you saying I need to cut it? Am I talking?
No, I'm saying, I just wanted to put in there, next year we wouldn't have anything. It would be 5 years before we'd see anything unless there's intermittent.
Well, I'm suggesting that there be an intermittent report on the concerns, like there's a whole listing on each one of these, the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, the concerns that are listed, and they're mostly all anecdotal, but they are concerns. And 2 big concerns come up to me in this, and one is the concern about enrollment and declining enrollment, which leads me to, okay, what do we need to do in our resources for recruitment? And then the other is, right now it's slipping from me, but there's a second one that came up and it's not with me right now. But I would like to see a report that next year we'll have the next cycle 2, which will have 10 more programs. But that we would also include in that report a intermittent, if you will, a progress on the identified weaknesses that are listed in each one of these programs. Because that would give us, I think, a real progress of how we are addressing the information that comes out of each of these program reviews. Overall, I'm just absolutely, I don't know, struck by the fullness of this system. I mean, this is a well thought out system that is going to take some time for, I think, our faculty and in the non-academic area, the staff as well, I suspect, to comprehend it and to utilize it and to make sure that they buy into it. I try to place myself as an employee here and how I would respond to this. I would need a lot of help understanding what a lot of this means. And so my question then also is there going to be some systematic way of seeking feedback from the reviewers this first cycle, or is that already in the process?
Trustee Erickson, I think I have an answer, but you will tell me if I don't.
Give it a try.
I should have made this clear. It's my error. So what happens to the follow-up reports? So the academic standards will be asking programs to talk about their weaknesses and to fix those weaknesses with follow-up reports. Those follow-up reports are to be put into the program review as supplemental material. They're due in the spring. They have 4 or 5 months to develop those. In a normal cycle, they'll have even longer. But in those follow-up reports, we expect to see action planning and discussion on how the program is improving their areas of weakness. And then those will be put into their self-studies, and they'll be scrutinized yet again, won't they, 5 years from now, when they have to do another program review. And the weaknesses will show up, the follow-up reports will show up, and another 5-year review of how they've done on those weaknesses will show up. But what's possible with that kind of tracking is that we could put together some report based on the follow-up reports on how programs are responding and mitigating weaknesses and making strengths and improvements. I think that's kind of a systematic way, I think, to approach it.
Thank you.
I'm just looking at you for response to the 1 year. I know Dr. Bender provided some information, but follow-up reports. Board, I'm sitting here wondering with regards to some of the programs, and again, I totally agree with Trustee Erickson in reviewing this information. It's enough of a challenge to get through all this and then wonder about what the people put into it that put it together and the time it took. But I'm just wondering, is there some way we can identify some of the concerns that I think Trustee Erickson is speaking to in some of the programs, to where we're not saying across the board we need all this, but due diligence follow-up on those where we have what we should have concerns about and who would be responsible for bringing those back to us.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, members of the board, to the first question, I think as Dr. Bender pointed out, when a program falls below a 3 in these areas there, the system or the process already requires them to do follow-up reporting to say, hey, we're addressing this. Here's what we're doing. We're implementing these action plans. These are the results. That reporting goes to academic standards, and it's really the place and the way that we ensure compliance and that folks are actually working on that. How and in what format and what your intent with it, would those types of reports come back to the board? I think that's something I would need to get from you as a board. What do you want to see, and what would you do with that type of information? Even putting together this report, I think, as Kim maybe alluded to, trying to figure out what. Let me step back. So the program review process here is a complex, comprehensive way for programs and faculty and eventually non-academic programs to evaluate their overall efficacy. We want to have quality programs here that are efficient and effective. This is a way for us to identify where we are, where we're not, and then identify how we're planning to be improved. So they're really tools for the institution, for the faculty, and for the programs to assess how effective are we, and then to improve upon that. And so it's going to feel and seem very complex. Even to me, at times, I get lost in some of that. But hopefully, the information as it falls out makes a whole lot of sense to the folks in sonography. And they're doing things about it with that information. So I guess one of the things I might could use some guidance from is from the board's perspective. What type of information, what type of analysis would be most useful for you to help us guide the types of reports? Because my guess is academic standards, Dr. Bender, faculty, we could put together all kinds of reports, all kinds of data, all kinds of actions, all kinds of results. I'm not sure what to bring back to you and what your intent with that information would ultimately be.
Let me try to respond a little bit. I'm not in my comments here and in my thoughts, I'm not looking for one large comprehensive report that would be a follow-up on an intermittent basis. Just a couple of things. An example, I'm not sure if it's in this one or in one of the others, but in the health sciences, clinical sites is a problem. Now, waiting 5 years to find out what we're doing about that, I think is a little bit too long. I think we need to see what is the action plan to achieve more clinical sites. I just use that as one example. I'm not looking for another big comprehensive follow-up report, no.
Sure. And Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, I'm trying to be politically conscious here of the conversation. So the system as it exists now has made that an awareness for the program faculty, for the deans, for the vice presidents, for the institution. Action plans will be put in place to address the things. And you can even see in the sonography report, they actually identified that as an issue in their 2012 self-study and have since already put in action steps that have alleviated some of that, the increase of clinical capacity within Denver and a few of the other areas with it. So it's working. Again, my question, and this is where I'm trying to be politically sensitive, is what do you as a board want to do with that level of detail information? If I come back to you and say the program X is having issues with clinical sites, I come back and they're doing it, it'd give you peace of mind to say, great, they're doing something about it. I'm just wondering what level of detail would you want in all the programs and the things that we're doing as a result of that. From a board's perspective, you want to know that, hey, we approve these programs, they need to be successful. Are you reviewing those and are they being successful? And so the summary information, I think, is very germane as a way to validate that we are going through that process. But what I worry about is this is going to be a living cyclical process on an annual basis where these types of interactions, what's the challenge? What's the opportunity? What are we going to do about it? Did that work? Did we make the improvement? And there's a process. So that the reporting could be perpetual on these things because every program has that area. At least that's what we hope is this is a cycle as we move through it. So I'm just struggling with what information to get you and why and at what level.
Okay, I can see where you're coming from. You'd like to get more feedback from each of us as individuals rather than one individual such as Trustee Erickson. But I'll let you know where I'm coming from on this is not only seeing what's happening relative to action plans to modify the weaknesses and concerns, but from a treasurer's point of view, there's budget allocation. The resource allocation is a big deal here. And if we have enrollment that is continuing to go down and we're using all our recruitment ideas that we can come up with and the enrollment still goes down, there's a real big question as to whether we want to continue the program.
And Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, I agree completely. And that a lot of folks that think at that level and as your responsibility resides at that level would say we need to put our resources where they exist. The way we've implemented this is to say we've made a commitment to a program. Let's see what we can do to improve it. There may come a time where we say, well, okay, maybe we don't need to continue to invest in that program. And I'll be honest, I'm not clear on a process that we have that would suggest when we pull the plug on something and when we don't. Right now, we're sort of trying to keep it from trying not to be make this a threatening process, if I'm saying that right. But I'm not even sure at what threshold we would say, look, sonography just isn't cutting it. We're going to pull those resources and reallocate them elsewhere.
Let's not use that as an example. Let's just say ABC, ABC program. You know, and you have driven into us the need for data, evidence, culture. Okay, so what we need is data to make decisions. And it's important for us to have data, I think, or at least feedback on the information or on the action plans I shouldn't use action plan, probably the efforts to reduce the weaknesses and to mollify the concerns and the like.
Trustee Merrill.
Chair Mosier, I think what I'm hearing Trustee Erickson say is that we want to know which programs are doing really well and which ones are not doing well that need improvement. And that would be what I would want. It would be nice to know what all programs are doing. But if we have one that is not filling, not making good economic sense, I would like to know which program that is or which programs those are so that we can make, and I know you'll make good decisions about whether they continue or not. But I'm really hearing that we probably don't need another large report like this, you know, in a year or whatever, but it would be nice to know which programs are doing well. And I think you do a good job. The college does a good job of keeping us apprised of those results.
And Madam Chair, Trustee Merrill, and I appreciate that. And I think we're getting a better handle on overall. We sort of refer to it, or at least I do refer to it as programmatic health. When we think of these programs, are they healthy? Are they resilient?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's where, you know, this quintile system and all these measures come into place. And I think that last page 18 on your analysis gives you a pretty good indication, at least in these programs that are being reviewed, their overall health. And you'll see that, you know, you've got on their self-study average as you go across, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 that we can say are healthy. They've got room to improve. The rest of them, there's a lot of work to do there. And we know that. And so this is, you know, really our first indication of a thorough analysis to say, where are there areas for improvement to become more healthy? Mm-hmm. And we're finally implementing a process for planning to say, okay, let's help you plan to improve in those areas. And that's why for me, while we may have to make those decisions if we're prodded by the need to do something new or, you know, financial constraints, budget reductions and things like that, you know, I'd like to see the process play out. So I mean, I think we've provided some of that information, perhaps not clear enough to give you an indication of the overall health of a program or to satiate your need to say, look, we're being responsible financially as trustees. We know we're investing in good programs and they're planning to approve. And I just may need some help, and we don't have to do it tonight, in helping me think about what's the best way to present that to you. Is it program review by program review, which is the way we sort of structured it to set up, but it does mean you may not see certain programs for 5 years. Mm-hmm. But if that's not immediate enough, there are mechanisms and structures built within that we could give an annual report from a granted more limited perspective on just outcomes. And again, if that helps you in your deliberations or your feeling like you're aware of it, I mean, that's the piece I'm trying to understand is what can I give you to help you fulfill your role as a trustee with regard to program review? We'll do that. I'm just trying to. We're thinking program improvement here. I'm hearing that you maybe want something else.
Trustee Little.
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Schaefer, when I think about what our responsibility is on this board, our responsibility is not to run the school, that's your responsibility. But our responsibility is to make sure that our community has a successful community college that meets the needs of the community and educates our students, that educates the students here, and then gives them the tools that they need, they being students, that our students need to go out into the world and be successful in the areas of learning and education and career that fulfill them. So what I appreciate Dr. Bender's work here a lot, and it was interesting to see the different performances of the programs. I would like to know, what does this mean for our students? What does sonography getting a 3.29 and music getting a 2.38, what does that mean for our students? What does that mean for our community? And what are we doing to produce a better product for our students and our community? I think it's great that we are discovering these weaknesses. I think that's great. I think it's very insightful that planning is a problem. I of course oftentimes equate that with my own division at work, and that's planning is a problem because we're putting out fires all the time. So I get that, and it's interesting to see that that's also a problem here because planning is really important. And are you planning for the future? Do you have a vision of where you want your program to go? Those types of things. So now that I've spoken out loud about that or thought out loud about that, it'd be good to know too, if Dr. Bender is seeing a real problem in planning, what's the plan to make that better? What can we do to make that better? Because planning is hard. It's tedious and it takes time and it's difficult to do. You got to get the buy-in from a lot of people because your plan and Dr. Schaefer's plan might not be the same. I could have a vision for my program and Dr. Schaefer looks at me and says, "Pacha, I don't like that a bit." So it's
a frequent statement out of my book.
So I want to know what this means to our students and what this means to our community and what we as trustees can do to make a difference. What can we do to make a difference?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Little, to the last question there, I think that the biggest thing you can do is really continue to focus on the work that you've done already in pushing us to be much more objective and goal-driven in regards to resource allocation and looking at the evidence of our overall effectiveness. You want programs that respond to the needs of our students and our community and help them become successful. And I think that's your appropriate role, and you should be able to do that. What this means, and Kim can jump in here if I get too far off. What this means, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this in a suitable way to do this.
You have to be politically correct.
I'm learning. I'm Pacha. I'm learning. What this means is that those programs in the green areas have identified, have a program that has met a threshold in which we say there are small things they need to be working on from a continuous improvement. In general, the health of that program and where they're at and what they're providing for our students and for our community is as such that we feel that they're operating well and they're in the right move, and we'll talk to them again basically on a review standpoint in 5 years.
Right.
If you see them in white, what it means is, no, the way we've designed and developed these programs are not meeting our expectations for quality programming or for the level of programming in all areas we would expect from a quality program. And therefore, we need to be doing something right now. And that's why the follow-up reports next year, that's why the implementation of the action planning, the follow-up of the assessment planning that's in place, the support they're receiving from the Institutional Research Office, the new special institutional projects coordinator, all of those resources are there to say, okay, you know what, Art, we're going to get working on this right now.
Right.
We're going to do that. And that's what this is telling you and telling me, if I'm interpreting it correctly, because I'm somewhat removed from it as well, is we've got all those things in place to be doing that work now. And planning is hard, and it's why we created Kim's position. It's why we created that division. It's why we've implemented assessment planning in the structure that we've had, why we've implemented the action planning thing. So we're providing all of those things, and I can tell you with great assurance that we've created the structure and moving that direction. We're just, I think, as Trustee Erickson said, this is the first round through it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Dr. Bender said that too. This is a baseline. Wow.
So if you were asking me for recommendations and thinking about, your responsibility for the allocation of resources into programs that are meeting the needs, do we have programs that need to be doing some work right now? You bet. Are there any programs or any compelling reason that I would bring a recommendation to you to close them and eliminate them? Not at this juncture.
No, it's too soon.
Yeah, not at this juncture. And that's what I think we're trying to do with this executive summary and this reporting, is to give you some assurance that we're working on these things. And I'm not, again, this is where I'm trying to be somewhat sensitive. I'm not at all worried about you guys asking questions that may seem like they're getting in the weeds. I don't have any issue with talking about clinical sites of the programs. I think it's good for us to have that question. It just may lead us down a slippery slope where we could spend hours and hours talking about issues that we've hired great faculty and academic leaders to be digging in. And we've now got a process in place that's designed to help guide them and focus their time and efforts to really improve those programs. And then where you look for it at the end of the day is on those institutional KPIs. Are more students graduating? Are they being retained? Are they getting jobs? Are they transferring? And that's really your indication of the health then of the institution.
Right. So how do we turn, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
How do we turn these numbers into what you just said, Joe?
Now. I think that's a wonderful question for Dr. Bender.
And the private
I don't know, Kim, if you want to.
I can try.
Yeah.
Yeah, Trustee Little, I'll try to give you a response to that. It probably won't be altogether satisfying, but good processes make good learning. And what's interesting, I was worried when I developed this executive summary that somebody would ask me that there wasn't enough quantitative description. And now I find I have too much quantitative.
Surprise!
I think Joe made a good point in the two words he used. The infrastructure system process provides faculty with guidance and focus. Where did we have focus before? If we were going to get a group of faculty together, or what group of faculty would we get together to work on planning? And why would they, or why should they get together to work on planning? Well, we've identified planning as a problem. We've identified the programs that have that problem. We can meet individually with them, and they'll understand why they should think about planning. And they have follow-up reports, so there's accountability. They have deans that know there's follow-up reports that'll be due. And so a lot of what we set up is focused on process, not only because it's good for us, and it is, but it's the way we want to develop our thinking in the future. We want to focus on processes, gather these results on the effectiveness of processes, and improve those processes. Our whole program review is designed that way. But if you think about curriculum design and instructional approaches, which are included in the program review, those are processes. And faculty, maybe not initially, but are beginning to think of them as processes. And they are beginning to see this question keep coming up, how do you develop rigor and complexity in your student learning over time in a systematic way. I think some faculty might just think that the program is a collection of courses, but not specifically have sat down so much, because they carry this around in their minds and their thinking. They don't make this explicit. They know it. They know how they're developing. Probably, I think they know how they're developing sophistication in their curriculum to challenge students consistently over time, so that their thinking becomes more mature. But they're having a lot of problems describing it, and hardly any programs are. Nursing hasn't had a program review, but I've looked at how they've developed their approach to scaling up learning course by course to first year and second year. It's pretty remarkable. But those are best practices that will emerge. Those are the processes that over time I think faculty will grab onto by talking to other faculty, by reviewing other program reviews. Look at those 44 people that are thinking about program review a lot for this cycle. They're going to be doing it again the next cycle. You think of the accumulation of all of that thinking and sharing of information, it's going to have to sink in eventually. And then I think we're going to see an improvement in those big scores like completion rates. Those are summative big measures at the end of the game. But we got to improve processes that's ahead of that feeds into we can't just say the completion rates are down. We got to go backwards and look at process by process. I believe in order to establish guidance and focus on what faculty should and can work on to improve the success of our students. And students, if I was a student, I would like to learn, or I'd like to see an institution that's paying attention to researching my learning. I mean, at least they're looking at it. It's a process of going in and researching learning, not just talking about it. And a program may not institute an improvement for 3 years. But in my thinking, that doesn't matter. What matters is that they're systematically studying and researching the learning of their students, semester by semester. And it's that behavior that is going to be repeated in a routine way over 2, 3, 4 years in a stronger and stronger way. Pretty soon they're going to get used to the idea of, I research my program student learning in a consistent way. I think students would be proud of that.
Trustee Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I was just trying to pull certain things out of the report, and one of my interests was in automotive technology, primarily because in Laramie we had Wyoming Technical Institute was like over 2,000 students. Well, there are less than 100 at this point. They have really dropped, and they're going through all kinds of reorganization, and so I was trying to see if there was a correlation a little bit about recruitment and more students. I couldn't quite tell. I was looking on page 7 here a little bit, and the fill rate was 105%, but the retention rate 98. So I'm seeing some pretty favorable numbers. Then when you look at the chart in the back, it's performing under a 3.0. It looks like. And we've all been talking about planning and being responsive maybe to market conditions and what's going on around us. And I'm hoping that, again, with this discussion and these reports, that we can have those kinds of understandings about what's going on in the marketplace a little bit and how that affects programs, especially what's going on with Wyoming Technical Institute in Laramie. And, that was automotive technology, that was diesel, that was welding. And I'd like to think that the college could play a big role there. Now, they do a lot of national recruiting, not quite the same, but again, just trying to see how these kinds of reports and the kinds of things that we think are going on in the marketplace and how we're maybe getting plugged into stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so Mr. Chairman, members of the board, one of the things, and again, I'd appreciate some feedback. I know that Dr. Bender would as well, and we'll think about this, but one of the things that might be helpful if I'm sort of reading through is if I were, when I say I mean Kim, and if we were to develop some type of why this matters to the board summary for the program.
Yeah.
To simplify, what does this mean? So, we've got some indication of what's happening with auto, and in some cases it's programmatic related. In other cases, it may just be that they didn't provide information they had, and so the reviewers had to score them low. But if
Probably the latter.
yeah, well, and I think that's what we found in some of the cases, right? That there wasn't as much of a shift, because where the reviewers had questions, if the program faculty didn't come back and answer that or provide that information, those scores didn't change. But I think Kim pointed out that, the sonography one, for example, its initial scores actually had it below a 3 on that average, but you see, if you look at all the dialogue, they had 100 and some comments. They went back and provided additional information that clarified things for the reviewers that changed those scorings. But so there's those dynamics. But is that what would be helpful if we had based on each program that goes through review to say, okay, here's what this means to you as a board. Program, enrollment is strong. Yes, it's expensive, but here are the areas they're focusing on. These are what we need to do. With that level of summary sort of hit you where you're trying to, because I get it. You approve a program based on a lot of the things. There's going to be jobs, there's going to be students, it's going to be affordable, all of those things. And you want to know, okay, are there jobs? Are there students? What are we doing to make sure we have that program? Is that the type of?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then why these are low? Like welding. Why is that not green?
Exactly.
So
the why.
And it could be for the comments you just made, that they didn't provide the substantive evidence. It doesn't mean it isn't there, but that's the kind of summary that helps us understand, which is what we were suggesting.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I recall in my scanning of these 10 programs over a 2-hour period this afternoon, a lot of areas were empty. They weren't that full. And then with history, for example, my gosh, you come away with a great knowledge of what's going on in history, because it has got a great deal of responses to the various questions. So I really think that part of this program review marking down, just very subjective in my own mind, is because the data had not been supplied through the review. And here again, I think it's part of the pre-testing of what we have to go through to get something like this to be a very viable instrument in our program review.
Number one, I want to go back and say, I think what we have here as a board member is really helpful. I do need to spend more time. I mean, this is not something I'm sure Trustee Erickson would say 2 hours doesn't cut it.
No, you got that right.
We need more time, but I think the brief that you're talking about, because this is done for continuous improvement. The whole intent, as I understand it, is we're trying to find ways to improve programs. And so you have to assess, you have to make plans to change where you need to make those changes. And I think we need to have a salient report along with this. I don't want to not see this, but a very short report referencing some of the points that Dr. Schaefer made, because I asked him earlier today, when I look at this from a board member's perspective, I kind of have a sense of some things, but I'm not sure what I should be looking at and trying to grasp as a board member. And so I think that would really kind of clarify that. And we may not get it the first time around, but I think as we start through this process, I think it would help us if we had those. And that way we also know then what we might keep an eye on and ask the questions in some time down the road, whether or not that's taken place, or hey, tell us about that program or something of that nature. Is that where we want to be? Trustee Merrill?
I just have a comment. When Dr. Schaefer hired Dr. Kim Bender, I wondered what he was going to do around here. And now I know. And it's pretty amazing. Thank you.
Yes. Other comments?
I agree with you, Ed, what you said.
Mm-hmm. And maybe we can add it to, if we're going to have a retreat, we could do a little more mid-year or something.
Well, and I think we need more time to look at this. I
Right.
know you want to do something over Christmas, so it's fine. You can do this as your term reports, but I want to make one other comment on this. And I know, Dr. Bender, you have alluded to that and probably said it more directly than I will, but I'm just amazed at the amount of work this takes. I mean, I think back, and again, some of you have been involved in different ways in instruction, education, and I look back at my experience and, teaching. Yeah, you're doing the kinds of things you said in terms of discourse. We used to do them a little more informally in the faculty lounge, where we're talking about why students didn't do this well and this well, and it wasn't systematic. It wasn't written down, but we were doing those things. Now you're really putting people's feet to the fire, and they have to sit there and design and plan. And the one thing I think back to is, a lot of faculty are, because we're a smaller institution, they are the program. And you don't have 3 or 4 folks in an area. And in some of our areas, we do have that, but many of them, a person is a program, and sometimes they even meld into a couple of programs. And I think that's a tremendous challenge. So I think recognizing the work that not just your folks are doing, and I really think, Jennifer and others are doing a great job on that, but I think the effort that has to be put out by the faculty, and I know I probably sound up here like I'm ringing their chimes, but to me, this takes a lot of work. I look back at this in previous efforts in terms of Higher Learning Commission accreditation stuff, and this is just so much more extensive. And the teaching and then doing this administrative task is just phenomenal. I mean, there's a lot of work going into this. So thank those faculty for the work, and the others who assisted the faculty in doing this. I just think it's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, if I may, just to offer my 2 cents on that, as I've watched this unfold and watched a lot of the changes at the institution unfold, I want you to know that you will not find this level of comprehensive, objective review at most institutions. And I'll throw 4-year institutions in there with community colleges. And it means it's a lot of work, and it's difficult work, and that's why you don't find it. But if we want to rise to a level of excellence as an institution, we have to have the discipline to be able to do that work, have the hard conversations, and understand the value. Because in the end, if we do this right, we can stand up a whole lot easier and look at our students and look at our community members and say, we're doing everything we can to ensure that you have the best education when you step through these doors. And everybody's working hard at doing that, and we provide high quality education. This gives us a laser-like focus on how we truly rise to the next level. And I just want to recognize the fact that it's Kim. Kim spends hours here I mean, I leave when it's dark and he's still in his office. I come here in the morning and he's there doing that. And one of the things that is worth recognizing is yes, the faculty working there. And Kim's always the one to point out this. Look at the faculty involvement and interaction. Just look at the comments. And it's good work and good dialogue and good comments, but there's really been one person who has been facilitating all of that, and that's been Kim, and he's been finding a way to get people, and some of them haven't come along willingly. I've heard enough of those conversations, and so as I struggle with trying to understand what best to provide you in terms of information with that, I just don't want to lose the fact that the leaps we've made in truly thinking about programs from a high value, high quality perspective has been astronomical in the past year and a half. And a lot of it's due to Kim, but a lot of it's due to the campus too, stepping up and saying, we're willing to commit to this. And so I just didn't want to leave that unstated in the conversation.
Thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Bender? Anything else you wish to share with us? You still have the podium.
Poor guy. Right. No, I think it's time for me to leave.
For the night. Thank you. just this last tidbit for you to think about. We've had the report. We're getting these. This is our first time that we've had our program review reports. And we've discussed what additional kind of approach we'd like to take with Dr. Schaefer on this. I'm still, in my mind, unclear, and I would hope other board members give some thought to, is this where we want it to be? What did we really expect? And what changes or suggestions might we have? We've given some already, but I think we have to think some more about this, because I know when I go back and I keep looking at this, I'm going to say, okay, how do I use this? How does this benefit us in serving the institution and our students? So, having said that, we don't have any. Trustee DuBois, you're keeping me straight. I haven't skipped an item yet tonight. The president's report. It's about time we got to hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board, you've probably heard enough from me this evening, so I'll do my best to be brief and to the point. Just a few things to talk about on your agenda and off of your agenda. First, most of you saw or have heard that the governor's released his budget recommendation for the coming biennium. And I thought I would just hit on a couple of areas that may be of most interest to you, and certainly happy to answer questions on my interpretation or your interpretation of his approach. I think the governor's budget is actually, given the circumstances, one that's very state focused, very community focused, and I think is one that will allow the state to continue to progress even while we deal with the challenges, and to be honest, to benefit from some of the prudent planning and saving that the state's done for this type of environment. From the community college perspective, first some good news, and I'll couch all this with the caveat that this is the governor's budget, and we know when it hits the legislature, lots of that can change. But the biggest thing in the governor's budget is he actually did recommend 12 point something million for funding for the community colleges based on recalibration of the model. So very similar to what we've been sort of working on the last few years, is let's actually look at a method to recalibrate based on current enrollment thresholds and provide appropriate funding for the enrollment that the community colleges are serving. He heard that, and in his budget, he's recommended that. Now, our request was 16 million, but at that time, it was looking at a threshold of enrollment that was higher than where we are arguably now. So $12 million is appropriate, and I think it's just nice to see that finally we're starting to gain that momentum where people recognize that we need to fund the community colleges appropriately based on the enrollment, the students that we're serving now, and the governor's budget sets that first step. And I think that's a big first step for overall funding for the community colleges. So that's the good news. The not so good news is his recommendations for capital construction funding. As you may have read in the paper, or heard, we received authority, or he recommends authority for our projects that would be funded entirely by us. The Residence Hall project and the Children's Discovery Center. However, he did not recommend any funding, planning, or construction for the Fine and Performing Arts building. In the community college realm, I believe he recommended construction funding for 3 projects, one at Sheridan College and then 2 at Central Wyoming College, one in Riverton and one for their Jackson project. And so, I may ask you down the road to give me some thought on how you might want me to proceed. Certainly, we still have the conversations available with the members of the legislature, but we'll have to think about what might be feasible for us to ask them to support in regards to our Fine and Performing Arts building, and how much we want to push that. So overall, those are really the big pieces that I've had the time to actually get in and look at from a community college perspective. The other piece that's worth noting, and it's not in his budget, is there was a request for a few $1 million to help the Community College Commission move down the road of an educational longitudinal data system. So as we've been talking about data integrity projects, things like that, we're ready to move on to having better data systems as a system. The governor, they actually pulled that from the commission's request because they found money in the current biennium or the current allocation to, I believe, ETS. that's been shifted to the commission to allow us to do that work. So I think that's been a good movement. So that's what I know about the governor's budget. And then just as a segue and quickly, and then I'll pause for questions if there are any, we'll go in front of the Joint Appropriations Committee next on the 11th. So that's the tail end of next week, I believe, where the commission will essentially present the community college budget to the Joint Appropriations Committee. And so we'll get a better sense of where they're at in regards to the governor's recommendation for funding for the community colleges. The following week, then, I believe, the week before Christmas, will be when A&I goes before the Joint Appropriations Committee to present capital construction projects that will include the community colleges. So I anticipate that I'll be at the legislature here for over the next 2 weeks, just for these meetings, and I'll report as those meetings go. Again, it's important to note that the Senate Chair of Appropriations is Senator Tony Ross from here, and then we also have Representative Bob Nicholas on the House side, as well as representatives from Laramie or Albany County, Representative Glenn Moniz and Representative Kathy Connolly, I believe, are on there. So we've got some power on the Joint Appropriations Committee. Any questions regarding legislative?
Mr. Chair, could you clarify your comment about the governor's approval of the residence hall and the CDC? Is that for us to move forward with no money? Or we can go to the next step if we find the money?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, correct. Those projects move forward, and those are seeking authority only, not funding appropriation. So they're projects, because they're over $1 million, required both the commission's authority to proceed as well as the legislature's. So the governor's recommended that we are granted that authority to proceed with those. But yeah, they're all on our dime. There's no state funds within those projects.
And they don't fund dorms anyway.
Well, I wasn't even suggesting. I just wanted to have a clarification of what is in the governor's budget proposal. That, okay, if the legislature agrees with him, we can then move forward if we find the money to do it.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, that is correct. Yep. Then just quickly, I wanted to touch on one thing based on conversations that Vice President Harper hit on and that were discussed at your last meeting. And then for those of you that read the paper today, there was an article in there regarding the Higher Learning Commission's changes and how they're impacting faculty qualifications. And I thought I would just try to summarize where there may be some confusion regarding the qualifications. The Higher Learning Commission has come in and essentially is clarifying and reinforcing some of their standards and assumed practices that have been on the books but haven't been real clear. And I guess the things that are most salient to take away is that they want to ensure that institutions have qualified faculty by credentialing or by experience for the delivery of education. And they start at that high level. And then they get in a little bit more specific, and they give general statements like they need to possess an academic degree relevant to what they're teaching in at least one level above the level at which they teach, except for in terminal programs. And this is where things get confusing. So in occupational areas, and I think Trustee Du Bois, you had this question earlier, in occupational areas where you won't find a prevalence of people prepared with bachelor's, master's, or doctoral degrees for career and technical areas, what they expect is a degree one level higher. So in many cases, they're looking sort of at that bachelor's degree threshold. But in this area, the institution can define how it provides testing for experience to create equivalencies, where a faculty member may have an associate degree, but based on their experience, industry certification, we need to define a policy and procedure in which we can test that a person actually has those. And so I don't want you to be confused that the Higher Learning Commission is saying that if you want to teach a welding course, you have to have a master's degree. It's not that blunt. It recognizes the difference between vocational, technical. Now, when it gets to general education and those that they call non-occupational courses, they get more specific and they say you must have a master's degree or higher in the discipline or the subfield. And then they kind of define subfields for us. But they get a little contradictory because then it says if you have a master's degree but not in a discipline or a subfield, you need 18 graduate credit hours in a discipline or subfield. And so the whole conversation about subfield is somewhat confusing. The long and short of it is that they don't go as far as to say that that an MBA won't, I think, Jerry, I'll put you on the spot, an MBA doesn't qualify to teach marketing. They don't go that far. That's a little bit too literal of interpretation. What they are going to say when they come to us is if you say an MBA qualifies a faculty member to teach a principles of marketing class, you have to have a policy and procedure in place that demonstrates how you've derived at that. And oh, by the way, that policy and procedure has to predominantly originate from the faculty who are the subject matter experts. And that's the work that Terry's referenced that has been going on now, is how we put that framework together to come in and to do that. So it's not a literal edict or interpretation of which disciplines will or won't. And honestly, the only place this will get tested is when we actually have HLC evaluators come to campus and they look at it. And just our experience in evaluation is some of that's going to be contingent on the evaluator and their interpretation of these things. But I just wanted to share that with you to know that it is not so blunt as to say there's one size fits all. But what it does say is that there's an expectation that the institution can demonstrate through policy and procedure that you have evaluated faculty qualifications to teach within their fields, predominantly using credentialing. But where we use experience, we have a very clear, robust system of testing for that experience and making that articulation. And so that's really the work before us. And I think we've got some room and some flexibility, but we've got to take that leap. And I think we're going down the right path now. And so I just wanted to clarify that because it gets a little confusing as you try to read the different dialogues that are going on right now regarding it. With that, Mr. Chairman, the only other thing on my president's report is your standard construction update. As you alluded to, those big, beautiful buildings are coming together quite nicely, and it's nice to see the structural steel going up on the Student Services University Center building. And so, weather permitting, if we can keep the wind from blowing things off it and, shutting down the cranes, and that's the big issue at this point. If they can't operate the cranes, the steel doesn't go up, but they're sure moving along nicely.
Mr. Chairman, I have a quick question. Joe, the Fine and Performing Arts Center, so there was no authority given, no funding given, nothing, stop.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Little, that is correct.
Okay.
There's no recommendation for any part of that.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else on construction?
No, sir.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Duke?
who all is on that Higher Learning Commission? Is this governor appointed?
No, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Du Bois, I'm sorry, I didn't
Sorry
address
for
your
my
earlier
ignorance.
questions. No, the Higher Learning Commission is a regional accrediting body. It's comprised of members of higher education institutions within the region that are essentially appointed through a nomination and then I believe an election process. They're staffed out of Chicago, but it is a regional accrediting process that sits above the state jurisdiction. So institutions from many states fall underneath the accreditation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there one large organization that then has regions? Or is it sovereign regions?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, yes, there's a handful, and I never remember, Kim, is there 7?
Okay, you've
California, yeah. So there's regional accrediting institutions. They must comply with federal regulation and structure, though, and so they are sort of somewhat loosely influenced or governed by the federal government. But the intent behind all of it is that it's peer evaluation from an accrediting standpoint.
Dr. Schaefer, just a question on construction. Those buildings are coming up and they're moving along, and I keep referring to each building as Flex Tech or UW and Student Services. I'm wondering at what point is there a plan to begin to look at naming, because that might become part of wayfinding, right?
Mr. Chairman, that is a good question that I would rather not answer at this. I say that in jest. Yes, one of the things we've been working on and set as a priority for the foundation was to help us identify naming opportunities specifically for those two buildings. At this juncture, we have a couple of options in the works, have not settled on that, but as Vice President Johnson has pointed out to me, we're going to be getting to that point where we got to make up our mind about what we put the signs, what those signs on those buildings will say. So we're certainly under that pressure. And honestly, we may have to think about even some of the naming conventions of other buildings as we go into the wayfinding practice. Right now we have them named and set, but do we want to continue to call the auto diesel building the auto diesel building? Because if that ever becomes something other than the auto diesel building, it probably shouldn't be called the auto diesel building. And so there is a naming conversation that needs to occur. I think we have 6 months or so before we have to actually get there. So I'm hoping we'll see some resolution on a couple of those.
Would that possibly be a part of the facilities master plan? Well, we're not. When do we start looking at that?
And Mr. Chairman, we're slated to do that this spring. I don't see why it couldn't be a consideration within that update. We'll have to look at that. There is a pretty strong structure, both internally and externally, from the campus wayfinding plan that we have. I think in this case, it's just we have those buildings that right now don't have a name. Every other building has a name. Now, whether or not we want to have a conversation about the appropriateness of those names, do we continue to call this the administration building, or should this be the Bill Dubious building or something like that? I think that's something we might want to entertain in the.
That was clear.
Okay. I appreciate your updates on that. Board reports. What we have is Trustee Erickson is going to talk a little bit about the GISS. I hope.
I'll try to keep this brief, Mr. Chair and fellow trustees. As you recall, we've been talking about the Wyoming Association of Community Colleges trustees working with the Association of Community College Trustees to put on an institute here for the Wyoming community colleges. ACCT has done this in about half a dozen states, has great experience, good references. And we thought it would be good for our little education committee of WACI to have a teleconference with ACCT, which we did yesterday. And we met with some of us know Narcissa Polonio. I'm pretty close.
Yep.
No, that's not bad. I'll just say Narcissa. I think Narcissa, who is the expert in these institutes, and she's been doing it for some time. She's a former president of a community college, is a top executive in ACCT. She was on the teleconference with us. We had a number of questions which we asked. Some of them that came forward were presented by me, and that was, how does this particular institute go? What's the methodology? What can we expect? Well, prior to the institute, there will be an online survey for all the participants, which is a self-assessment of what we think about what's going on in our given college. And it's given a number of specific items similar to the way we evaluate Dr. Schaefer. That information is then tabulated. They also do a thorough review of data that is available from the state and also from the federal people, that they will report back to us about our status in dealing with student success. Then that is reported to us individually by colleges. So each college, the trustees and the president, we will sit down with Dr. Joe and we'll review all of that. In addition to that, then there will be plenary discussions, particularly in our state, with us moving along so well in student success and with the Complete College Wyoming, how all of that fits into the future and develop action plans at this. It'll be a 1.5 day institute. We seem to have a pretty good warm and fuzzy response by the members of the committee But we felt it was important to go back to the boards so that each board in the state had an opportunity to review what we're planning, which would be in the sometime in May, and I'm pushing for late May because sometime after the graduation time and so forth. We will have about a $3,000 tuition fee. That's for the whole college, not for each individual. There's an additional cost that WACI is going to cover, and there's going to be a board meeting for WACI. It'll probably be a teleconference sometime here, maybe early January or late December, to get the approval to spend the dollars out of professional development toward this institute. So I guess what I would like to have from the board is a continuance of what you gave me last time we talked. You said, go forward, keep going on this. It sounds like something that we would like to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I just like to be reinforced to have a confirmation on that.
Anyone not wanting to confirm, I should say.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee
So the institute is for all of the statewide community colleges or just us?
It's just for Wyoming community colleges.
Right, but all of them in Wyoming?
Yes,
So we would get together in one spot?
yes.
And then ACCT would come out here and train us?
And, well, they'd be a facilitator and there'd be some training, but actually it'd be an opportunity for us to be somewhat introspective about what we've been doing and where we want to go.
Okay.
And then each college will then have its own action plans, which they will then follow up with us specifically. And then they'll follow up with each of the other 6 colleges.
If you didn't indicate, I believe Casper was the suggested site at this point, right?
No, in fact, most of us thought that it'd be better to be outside of Casper, like maybe Douglas or Lander, but a central location. If I get a confirmation to move forward on this, I'll continue to advise the WACI board that, yep, LCCC is on board.
I'd say we're on board.
Well, there's one other thing I should have said. We also had Clara Leach, who's the president of Western Community College, who is a very strong supporter. And she indicated that she thought that the presidents were pretty much on board with this.
Carla Beach.
Who did I say?
Clara.
Clara? I used to know her. Carla, I'm sorry.
Yes. Okay, then this board supports that and would look forward to trying to attend as best as possible.
Mr. Chairman,
Early date would be good.
Trustee Dubois.
I just, when I first was on this board, the national ACCT and blah, blah, they used to do television programs, and we'd come out here to the college and they'd set up a TV, and they would have trustee training right here, and it'd be coming to our TV and to the TVs around the state. And Don, I'm not suggesting that your idea isn't just great, but I'm just saying that one time they used to do these television telecasts, and they went all over Wyoming, and they had it set up so that you could ask questions like a Skype thing. And
press video.
Mr. Chair, Trustee Dubois, yes, that's exactly, they still do this. They have a number of webinars. In fact, part of the follow-up with us will be through televideo, so that there will be opportunities for us to interact with them. And there is on their website, there are 2 videos of previous institutes in Ohio and Nebraska, which I would encourage anyone that wants to see how these things go. It's a link on the ACCT website.
Maybe you could share those links with each of the members, and that way we can take a look if we wish.
With the help of Vicki. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Merrill.
Mr. Chair, Trustee Erickson, the sooner we have a date, the better. I think we would all be able to plan our time there.
I'm pushing for latter May
Miss?
And I don't know if I have a consensus on that with the education committee, but that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, and would this be like during
A
the
day and a
week?
half. No, it would be a Friday, Saturday.
Friday, Saturday. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, one other thing just on the topic, and I may have shared this with you. If you're interested, the Nebraska Community Colleges are working to bring the ACCT Governance Leadership Institute, which is slightly different. If you'd remember, there's the one I think we attended in Chicago, New York, I think a while ago. Anyways, they're bringing it to Nebraska. They're looking to get 30 participants. I think they have 20. It'll be held in Grand Island though, so it's a little bit of a jaunt. But if any of you are interested and haven't been through it, it is a good primer to trustee governance and leadership, and it's sort of in the neighborhood. And I think it only would cost about $400 per attendee to go. So if you happen to be interested or want more information about the Nebraska one, let me know, and I'd be happy to get that to you.
Thank you, Dr. Schaefer. At this point, I'd like to hear the report from Trustee Cadle.
Actually, not much of a report tonight, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Malm couldn't be here. I think he had some activities planned for his staff and faculty. So he didn't have much to report. I would like to thank Trustee Lummis. She came over to have lunch with us and see the Albany County campus. Was that your first time in that building? So we appreciate that. And so in fact, if any of the other trustees have not seen the campus, we'd love to have you over. And we don't have a fancy lunch, but I think the building and shows well, and so we're proud of it. So thank you very much. And just to say that I thought the program review tonight and just the updates from the President's Cabinet was very helpful. Thank you. I learned a lot from that discussion and curriculum, and so that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing that Butch may not know or probably is worth updating you on. We started a conversation at the Albany County campus, and many of you have heard this, stem from the fact that we don't have adequate, in numbers, not in design, we don't have enough science lab spaces on that building. And so it's limited some of our offerings. We do have an art lab there that we started exploring whether we should convert that to a wet science lab. It's right next to the existing science lab. To do that has led to a conversation and analysis whether or not we should actually add on to the existing building. For those of you that have the history, which I didn't have when it was designed, it was actually designed to potentially add 2 more classroom pods off of each end. You know, it's kind of in a V shape. And so we've had Tobin and Associates is working on a mock-up of a design of what that may look like and how we may do that. My worry is it could be pushing close to $1 million to do that. But just so you know, while we work on land and thinking about how we handle some of the space issues, there may be some need to do some type of intermediary remodeling to get those additional science labs over there. And I think they were going to go back and actually do a formal type of level 1 plan, and at which point we would bring that to you as a board to review. But I just thought I'd give you a heads up that we probably need to do something to add that science lab there. And if that means, you know, adding out onto those 2 sections, it could be something we'll end up looking at for the, you know, probably summertime.
Great.
Thank you. Our student trustee, Noah.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So I just have 2 things to talk about. And the first one being we created a memo from all the things we collected from the meet and greet, all the responses we got. So we have a memo to send to Dr. Schaefer for that. And then the other thing would be about the locker use, if students would actually use them or not. And surprisingly, actually, over half of the students that we surveyed, I told SGA senators to collect that information for me and everything like that. And over half said that they wouldn't use it. But who's to say that they all live in the dorms and they all have their stuff there, you know? So it's hard to tell from those numbers because we didn't get that many people. But on the yes side, they were saying student lounge was the majority, is where they want them actually. And then also health science or like the library. So there was a bunch of suggestions, and then welding as well. I talked to our 4 of the welding students. They all strongly agreed that they need lockers there to put all their equipment. I'm sure they have a ton of equipment to put in there. So, but yeah, I think I will bring this back to SGA because like the information that I collected was kind of eye-opening, as if should we even put these lockers in? Like, will they even be utilized? I know there's some up in EEC. I feel like they're not used very much, but I'm not sure. So look more into that.
When you do that survey, or as you ask more people, you might ask them if they know about locker availability and where they might be.
Right. Oh, and also another thing, adjuncts having lockers, that would be a big thing because, I mean, they have their car and then they don't really have an office space. They have a place where they have office hours, but it's not really their own space. And so maybe having lockers in different location or in each building for the adjuncts is another thing to consider. So, that's, yeah, so I'll bring all that back to SGA.
Thank you. Good information. Appreciate that. Any questions for Noah?
Noah, do you want to share what your top 3 things from your meet and greet?
It was the Wi-Fi in the dorms,
which we heard about at dinner.
Yeah, and then the adjunct teachers not being available, I think was the second one or third one, and not as much. And so that was just concerned with different ones. And then it was the math classes, really no real like teacher communication for like what questions, like so you had a question and you did it wrong, then it just like kind of shows you, then it pulls up another question. Doesn't really show you and walk you through exactly what you did wrong in that, but that's kind of like the human aspect of, walking them through it. And so if a lot of your courses are online, even though it's like not an online class, there's not much teacher interaction there with the students. And a lot of students brought that concern up. So
they were really looking for synchronous rather than, isn't that what it is?
Yeah, I think,
rather than asynchronous.
I think my understanding is the concerns over the implementation of new technologies and the heavy reliance on just the technology to facilitate the learning, if I'm understanding what folks shared. And dances in the student lounge, right?
Dances in the student
More dances.
So, are we invited?
Yeah, sure.
Are we doing that now? Are we doing dances now?
That has happened before, yes, sir, I believe.
They want the trustees to sing karaoke as well, so.
I'm on.
Of course you're on.
Well, dubious can go with you.
Yeah, Bill can go.
You didn't respond. No, I'm talking about you and I doing it.
Oh, yeah. Go for it. I love to sing karaoke.
Any new business?
It's done.
Please take a look at your calendar, which we've been provided with. Thank you, Vicki. Really appreciate that.
And may I point out something in the calendar?
Yes.
There is a music concert. The LCCC Holiday Music Concert is the 7th. And it's not on here, but it's Monday, December 7th at 7 o'clock at St. Mark's.
Yeah.
Is I think it's the Wind Symphony and the Choir.
It is,
Holiday
it's both.
concert. Yes.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock on the 7th at
7.
St. Mark's.
And we got a personal invitation from Aaron today in the email.
Yes.
I
Thank
think it'd
you.
be great if we all went to that too.
I unfortunately have to do this.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely.
Last thing I'll mention for clarity that we kind of need to have here is F&F meeting. Is there going to be one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that'll be next Wednesday.
Okay.
I will not be there.
Okay.
I'm gonna miss you.
Anyone?
Where are you going? Where are you going this time?
Nowhere.
No. Any public comment? Any public comment?
I thought you had a big trip.
Hearing none, this meeting's adjourned.